Come closer. The shadows have missed you, and tonight they have a new story to tell. Welcome to Scary Stories After Dark. The first scream didn't sound human. It ripped through the quiet of the night like a blade tearing through silk, high-pitched, jagged, and so full of raw terror that Jeff's heart stopped for half a second. He shot upright in bed, drenched in sweat, lungs heaving like he'd been drowning in his sleep. For a moment, he thought one of his roommates was messing around. Colin, Mac, or Spade always found new ways to make noise at the worst times. But this wasn't a drunken prank. This was different. This was real fear. Jeff's eyes darted to the window above his desk. The curtain stirred from the open crack of his fan and beyond the glass. The house. That perfect Victorian that sat across the lawn like a polished corpse. It looked beautiful from the outside. Cream siding, black shutters, a porch with columns that seemed to hold their breath. The for sale sign out front was bleached from too many seasons of sun, the grass on the lawn trimmed within an inch of its life, but no one ever bought it. No one even looked at it for more than a few minutes. Now, in the dead of night, it was awake. Every light blazed, spilling gold onto the manicured lawn. Upstairs, a chandelier swayed wildly, its crystals flashing like warning signals. Then came the second sound. Not a scream this time. An animalistic shriek, wet and guttural, as if something was clawing its way out of its own body. Jeff's skin prickled, every hair on his arm standing on end. Something moved behind the curtains. At first it looked like people, shadows pacing, figures crossing the window panes, but the shapes were wrong. Too tall, too bent, their arms stretched too far. One shadow stopped. It turned toward the window, toward him. Jeff's breath fogged the glass. The chandelier above it swayed harder, an invisible wind pushing it, and then the lights died. The entire house plunged into darkness. The scream stopped. The shriek cut off. The silence that followed felt worse, somehow, like the night was holding its breath, waiting. Jeff stayed frozen by the window for what felt like hours, staring at the black shape of the Victorian house. It didn't move, it didn't breathe, it just watched. Somewhere downstairs, he heard Colin's door creak, footsteps padding to the kitchen, but Jeff couldn't move because he swore he saw the faintest shift in the upstairs window. A silhouette, still, head tilted, watching him. Jeff didn't sleep, not after that first scream, not after the shadow in the window tilted its head just a little too far, like a puppet whose strings had been yanked too hard. He sat there in bed, blanket wrapped around his shoulders like some flimsy armor, his eyes fixed on the black silhouette of the Victorian house across the yard. His clock blinked 3:42 a.m., then 4:13 a.m., then 5:01 a.m. Only when the sky began to bruise with dawn did he finally lie down. He didn't even realize he'd fallen asleep until he woke up to sunlight slicing through his blinds and Mac throwing a balled-up hoodie at him. "Dude," Mac snorted, yawning. "You look like you spent the night fighting demons." Jeff didn't laugh, because that's exactly how it felt. By the second night, he tried to tell himself it was nothing. Maybe someone broke into the place and squatted there. Maybe it was bored high schoolers who thought screaming in an empty house was the height of comedy. But then, at 3 a.m., sharp, the screaming came again, louder. He sat bolt upright, chest tight, his breath shallow. The sound scraped at his bones like nails down a chalkboard. And then came the other noise, a wet, rattling growl, something between a hiss and a sob. Jeff pressed his forehead to the window pane. The glass was icy cold. The house across the way was lit up again, every bulb, every lamp blazing. The chandelier swung so violently now he thought it might snap loose. Shadows danced through the upstairs curtains, but these weren't even vaguely human. One shadow dragged itself across the wall, long arms scraping along the floor, fingers bent back like snapped branches. Another lurched across the window, its head low, neck jerking at impossible angles. And then, just like before, everything stopped. The lights went black, the screaming cut off. The silence hit him like a punch. Jeff stood there, knuckles white against the windowsill, the quiet ringing in his ears. It wasn't just silence. It was wrong, like the sound had been vacuumed out of the world, leaving only an empty hum that made his teeth ache. By the third night, he called the cops. They didn't even bother to get out of their car. 2 officers cruised by, shined a flashlight on the porch, and one of them leaned out the window to say, "Probably a prank. College town, what do you expect?" Jeff wanted to scream back, "Do pranks leave you feeling like someone's fingers are crawling under your skin? Do pranks leave you wide awake for 3 nights straight?" But he didn't. He just watched their taillights disappear, the house next door swallowing the night again. By the 4th night, Jeff wasn't just scared, he was angry. He sat at the window like a man on watch, shoulders tight, eyelids raw, his breath fogging the glass. The house didn't look haunted, it looked perfect, too perfect, like it was holding a secret behind those black shutters, behind that bleached for sale sign, behind those curtains that swayed even when there was no wind. And then, as if the night wanted to mock him, he saw it, a shadow moving outside the house this time. On the lawn. It was tall, taller than any person should be, and so thin it looked like it could fold in half with a gust of air. It didn't walk, it glided. Slowly, deliberately, its head turned toward his window. Jeff's breath caught in his throat, frozen. The figure stilled. For a long, horrible moment, neither of them moved. Then, in a blink, it was gone, vanished. The yard was empty again. Jeff stepped back from the glass, heart hammering against his ribs. The silence in his room felt like it was watching him. By the 5th night, Jeff's nerves were shot. He sat on the edge of his bed, elbows on his knees, eyes bloodshot and glassy, staring out the window like the house might leap across the yard if he blinked. His roommates noticed. Mac, sprawled on the couch with a bag of pretzels, chuckled, "Dude, you've turned into, like, the neighborhood watch from hell." "Yeah," Spade added, not even looking up from his laptop. "You're one lawn chair away from yelling at squirrels." Jeff didn't laugh. His jaw clenched so hard it hurt. Colin, the reasonable one, the one who always talked them out of trouble, leaned on the doorframe, arms crossed. "Man, you've gotta let this go. It's just a house." But it wasn't. Every night the screaming came. Every night the shadows moved. Every night the lights in that Victorian burned so bright they seared into his brain, only to snap off when he dared to look closer. He was losing sleep, losing focus, losing his grip. By 3 a.m. that night, when the first scream came again, long, ragged, and almost human, Jeff felt something inside him snap. Enough. He was done being the kid who just stared from his window while something wrong happened right next door. The night was thick with fog when Jeff shoved his feet into his sneakers and stormed across the yard. The grass was slick, cold, soaking through his socks, but he didn't care. The Victorian loomed over him, its windows dark and still. Up close, it was even more unnerving. Perfect paint, perfect shutters, too perfect, like a dollhouse waiting for someone to open it up. Jeff marched up the porch steps and pounded on the door. "Hey," his voice cracked, sharp against the silence. "I don't know what game you're playing, but it's gonna stop now." No answer. He rang the doorbell. The hollow ding-dong echoed through the house, carrying on far too long, like the sound was stretching inside those walls. The porch light stayed off. No footsteps approached. No one peeked from behind the curtains. Only silence, the kind of silence that feels like it's listening. Jeff stood there for a long moment, heart thundering. Then he heard it. A faint creak, somewhere inside. He pressed his ear to the door, breath shallow. Nothing. He stepped back, looked up. Every window stared back at him, blank and black, like the house itself was holding its breath. For the first time since he left his room, doubt crept in. His anger fizzled into unease. The porch wood groaned beneath his feet. Jeff backed away slowly, the air heavy, pressing in. And as he crossed the lawn again, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Because he couldn't shake the feeling that something inside that house had just seen him. By the seventh night, Jeff wasn't even pretending to sleep. He sat at his desk with his laptop open, the glow from the screen pale and sickly against his face. He wasn't working. He wasn't studying. He was watching. The Victorian house loomed across the yard like a corpse that hadn't realized it was dead yet. At exactly 3 a.m., the screaming started again. It was worse now, raw and desperate, like something was being peeled apart from the inside. The chandelier in the upstairs window swung like a hanging noose. Shadows thrashed across the curtains, bent and broken in all the wrong ways. Jeff gripped the arms of his chair so tight, his knuckles burned. Something snapped inside him. No more watching, no more calling the cops who didn't care, no more being afraid of the dark. He grabbed his hoodie, slipped out the door, and crossed the lawn in bare feet. The Victorian up close was worse, far worse. The air around it felt heavy, like the house wasn't just standing there, it was pressing down on the earth. Its paint was flawless, its porch steps swept clean, but the perfection felt wrong, like the smile of someone hiding a knife behind their back. Jeff hesitated on the porch, his breath frosting in the air. Then he grabbed the doorknob, locked. Of course. He should have walked away then, should have let it go, but his pulse was screaming louder than his thoughts. He pulled his wallet from his pocket, slipped out a bent credit card, and jimmied it into the latch the way he'd seen in movies. The door clicked, and slowly, painfully, the Victorian house opened its mouth. The smell hit first, musty, damp, rotting wood and dust, and underneath, something sweeter, something wrong, the kind of smell that clings to your throat and makes you want to gag. Jeff stepped inside. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe, as if the walls had been holding their breath for years and were now exhaling straight into him. The floorboards creaked with every step, not the innocent creak of an old house, but long, low moans, like whispers spilling through the wood. He moved slowly down the hallway, his phone flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam barely seemed to cut through the dark, like the shadows were swallowing the light whole. Upstairs, one door was cracked open. Jeff felt it before he saw it. A tug. Like invisible fingers hooked into his shirt, pulling him toward it. His breath came in sharp, shaky bursts as he stepped into the room. The walls were empty. The closet door hung crooked on one hinge, and in the corner, coated in dust, sat an old Polaroid camera. It looked harmless, small, black, its surface smeared with age, but when Jeff reached for it, the cold nearly burned him. A chill shot up his arm, sinking into his bones. He picked it up, wiping away a streak of dust with his thumb. Something scuttled in the dark behind him, so fast, so close, he could feel the air move against the back of his neck. Jeff spun around, flashlight jerking wildly across the room. Nothing. But he wasn't alone. Every nerve in his body screamed it. The house was breathing. And it was breathing on him. Jeff turned the Polaroid over in his hands, dust flaking off like dried skin. It was heavier than it looked. Not in the way an old piece of tech should be heavy, wrong heavy, as if it carried something inside it. His phone light shook as he brushed away grime from the back, revealing tiny, etched words in lettering so small he had to squint. Works best at night. Use no light. Jeff frowned, the chill from the words settling into his fingertips like frostbite. He raised the camera, almost without meaning to, and pressed the shutter. Click, whir. A blank square of film slid out with a faint hiss, curling slightly at the edges. He shook it once, twice. It stayed white. He tried again. Click, whir. Another blank. By the third, his stomach tightened. The film wasn't even cloudy. It was like the camera refused to show what it saw. He wiped the lens with his sleeve, dust smearing across it like old ash. Piece of junk, he muttered, his voice sounding too loud in the dead house. And then something moved behind him. Not a creak, not a draft, a movement. The kind of movement you feel before you hear. A shift in the air, a brush against the back of your neck, so close his hair stood on end. Jeff spun, flashlight slicing through the room. The corner was empty. The shadows were not. They seemed to lean forward as if they'd been caught watching. Jeff snapped another photo, this time without thinking. Click, whir, the film slid out. This time, the image didn't stay blank. Something was there. Faint, fuzzy, the blur of a long, crooked arm, its fingers spider-thin, its joints wrong, each one bending too far. Jeff blinked hard. The picture looked like static made flesh, shapes you couldn't fully see because your brain didn't want to. And then, a faint line of blood trickled down his forearm. Thin, red, stinging. He hadn't felt a cut, hadn't seen anything touch him, but the scratch was there, burning, like whatever was in the picture had reached out and touched him. The house groaned long and low, as if it was pleased. Jeff shoved the picture in his hoodie pocket, heart hammering, and forced himself to leave the room. But even as he stumbled down the stairs and out the front door, gripping that cold Polaroid in his shaking hands, the house seemed to lean after him, whispering with its walls. The last thing he saw before he shut the door behind him was the shadow of a hand sliding across the hallway wall. A hand that wasn't his. Jeff didn't sleep for the rest of that night. He sat cross-legged on his bed, the Polaroid camera in his lap, staring at it like it might move on its own, because every time he blinked, he swore he felt that cold burn in his hand again, the one he'd felt in the house when he picked it up. And every time he pulled the photo out of his pocket to look again, the blurred, crooked arm seemed a little clearer. By sunrise, Jeff wasn't scared anymore. He was obsessed. By nightfall, his friends were sick of it. "You're telling me this dusty-ass camera cut you?" Mac asked, chewing the cap off a soda bottle. "Like spirit paper cut style?" Jeff didn't even look up. "You didn't hear the screaming." "I heard you pacing all night," Spade muttered from the couch, flicking his lighter on and off, on and off. Colin, the steady, patient one, looked between them, frowning. "What's the point of going back, Jeff?" Jeff stared down at the camera, the weight of it pressed into his hands like a dare. "I need to know," he said. The house waited for them. It always did. The moment Jeff pushed the door open, the same thick, heavy air washed over them, clinging to their skin like damp cloth. "Ugh," Mac grimaced, yanking his hoodie over his nose. "Smells like my grandma's basement after a flood." "Yeah," Spade muttered, "except, worse." Their footsteps echoed too loud on the wooden floor. Each creak sounded like someone else was walking with them, just behind. The house wasn't abandoned. It was listening. Jeff lifted the camera. "Why are we even doing this?" Colin asked softly, his voice too low, like speaking louder might wake the house. Jeff didn't answer. He snapped a photo. Click, whir. The first picture slid out, blank. He shook it, heart pounding. Something faint began to form. Lines, shapes, fingers. Long fingers. By the time the image fully developed, the thing in the picture was almost touching his shoulder, but there was nothing there. They all laughed at first, nervous, strained laughter, until Jeff looked down at his arm, a fresh scratch, thin, long, bleeding. "Dude," Mac froze mid-laugh, his voice cracking. Jeff snapped another photo. Click, whir. This one developed faster, the blurry outline of a face, except it wasn't really a face. The jaw stretched too far, the eyes were black pits, the teeth, there were too many, and as the picture darkened, the smell of iron filled the room. Spade hissed suddenly, clutching his neck. "What the hell?" He pulled his hand away. Blood. Thin claw marks. The camera whirred again on its own, spitting out another picture. This one showed the creature's hand, long claws, joints bending in impossible angles, resting over Spade's shoulder. But the air around them was empty. The scratches burned. And somewhere, deep in the house, a low moan creaked through the walls, almost like the house was laughing. The photos spread across the dusty floor like fallen leaves, their edges curling, their images smudged and unnatural. Each one was worse than the last. Hands that didn't belong to anyone, faces that weren't faces, shapes that blurred like smoke but looked like they were reaching, always reaching. Jeff stared at them, heart hammering, as another scratch split open across his forearm without warning. The sting was instant, hot, and angry. Spade swore under his breath, clutching his neck where another invisible claw had raked him. "This is bad," Colin whispered, voice cracking. "This is so bad." Mac forced a laugh, thin and sharp. "Yeah, no kidding. We've officially become the idiots in every horror movie ever." Jeff didn't answer. He was too busy snapping another picture. Click, whir. The film slid out, the camera spitting it like it was exhaling something foul. The image bloomed slowly, lines forming into a shape, not a creature this time. A person. Jeff's heart lurched, because outside the dusty living room window, the shadow figure they'd been seeing for nights, the one who stood in the yard, the one who stared, was there. For the first time, they saw her clearly. A girl, maybe 20, pale, wild dark hair tangled around her face, Her coat was ripped, mud splattered up her legs. She wasn't moving toward the house. She was standing there, staring at them. "What the hell?" Mac muttered, stepping closer to the window. The girl's lips moved, soundless. She pointed, not at the house, not at them, at the camera. Jeff froze, the Polaroid heavy in his hands. The girl shook her head. "No." Her mouth formed. But he didn't stop. Jeff lifted the camera. One last picture, just one more to see if she was real. The flash went off. Click. Whir. The scream that followed wasn't from the house. It was hers. The girl's mouth opened wide, her voice splitting the night as her body seemed to fold inward, like she was being sucked through an invisible hole. 1 second she was standing in the yard. The next, she wasn't. Jeff dropped the camera. It hit the floor with a hollow thud, but the damage was already done. The photo slid out, her face blurred, distorted, caught mid-scream. "Trapped," Colin whispered first. "Did we just kill her?" But Jeff couldn't speak because outside the window where she'd stood, the yard was empty. The house creaked, a low, satisfied moan rolling through the walls, and the camera in Jeff's hands suddenly felt heavier. Like it had eaten. The photo lay on the floor like a dead thing. Her face, twisted, screaming, was trapped behind the glossy surface, her mouth frozen mid-howl, her eyes two wide, glassy pools of terror. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. It was Mac who finally whispered, voice shaky, "She's gone." Jeff's fingers trembled as he picked up the picture. His own reflection blurred across it for a second, his hollow eyes staring back, before he quickly looked away. He could feel it, the weight, like the photo wasn't paper at all, but something solid, something full, like the girl was inside. "This isn't just a camera," Colin said, voice low, flat. Jeff's head snapped toward him. "What do you mean?" Colin didn't blink. "It doesn't just take pictures, it takes." His words fell heavy in the room, and the house seemed to agree, groaning faintly, wood popping under unseen pressure. Spade swore under his breath, pacing. "Okay, no, nope, we don't do this. We don't keep this thing. We don't mess with this. We take it and we..." "Smash it?" Mac asked, half laughing, half serious. Jeff clutched the camera tighter. "If we smash it," his voice cracked, throat dry, "what happens to her?" The four of them stared at the photograph. The girl's name scratched through their minds like a whisper they couldn't hear fully. They didn't know who she was. They didn't know why she'd been standing there every night, but they knew this. They had done something they couldn't undo. Colin was the first to break the silence. "We need to find out what this house is. What happened here?" Spade barked a hollow laugh. "Oh yeah, sure. Let's just have a little research session about the murder camera that's eating people now. That'll fix everything." But there wasn't much sarcasm in his tone anymore, because Spade's hand kept drifting to the scratches on his neck, still raw, still burning. Jeff looked back down at the photo. The girl's eyes seemed to stare back at him, accusing, pleading. A cold thought slid through him, thin and sharp. She wasn't the first. He swallowed hard, the air suddenly feeling thick. This house, it used to be a frat house. I heard people talking about it at school. Parties, hazing, stupid crap like that. And then people started disappearing. Colin frowned. "How many?" Jeff's throat tightened, enough that the whole town shut up about it. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was charged. The kind of silence that means there's only one thing left to do, and none of them wanted to say it first. It was Mac who finally broke it. "We're going back." Spade groaned. "Why do I feel like you're about to say the dumbest thing you've ever said?" "We're going back," Mac repeated, his voice harder now. "We figure this out. We figure out what this thing," he pointed at the camera, "is doing, and..." He glanced at the photo, then back at Jeff. "And we get her out." The words hit Jeff like ice water. Get her out. The girl in the photo, Sarah. He didn't know her name yet, but in his gut, it rolled like a whisper. Colin's jaw tightened. "If we go back, there's no guarantee." "Yeah," Spade cut in, "like 0% guarantee that we don't end up inside that thing too." Jeff's fingers tightened around the camera. The weight of it felt different now, heavier, hungrier, but he nodded anyway. "We have to." Outside, the wind howled, rattling the broken shutters of the Victorian house across the yard. The house almost sounded like it was laughing. The house didn't look dangerous in the daylight. That was almost worse. By morning, it was just another pristine Victorian with sun-warmed paint and trimmed hedges, the kind of place a realtor might call charming. The screaming and scratching and moaning were gone, like the house had pulled a blanket over its own sins. Jeff sat at the kitchen table, staring at the Polaroid camera. Mac leaned against the counter, arms crossed, silent for once. Spade was pacing, chewing his thumbnail raw. And Colin, the level-headed one, the one who always cleaned up their messes, just stared. Finally, he said, "I'm not going in there again." Jeff looked up, hollow-eyed. "Colin." "No," Colin snapped, his voice sharp, harsher than they'd ever heard it. "I'm not stepping foot in that house. You saw what happened. That girl is gone. Whatever that thing is, it took her, and it'll take us too." "We can't just leave her in there," Mac muttered. Colin's hand slammed down on the table. "She's already gone." The silence that followed was brutal. Spade let out a low laugh that sounded more like a sigh. "You're not wrong, but you're also missing the part where Jeff's clearly about to go in anyway." Jeff's fingers tightened around the camera. It felt warm now, like it had a pulse. "I'm going," he said simply. Mac shook his head, muttering, "Of course you are," but there was no real resistance in his voice. Spade cracked his knuckles, eyes darting anywhere but the table. "Guess that means I'm going too, because you're too stupid to go in there alone." Colin just stared at them, his face pale, unreadable. "You'll die in there," he said softly. Jeff met his eyes. "Then you need to figure out how to bring us back." That's when Colin's role became clear. He'd be the anchor, the one who stayed behind, digging through everything, old articles, dusty town records, anything that might hold the truth, because someone had to figure out how to undo this before the camera ate them too. By nightfall, the plan was decided. Jeff, Mac, and Spade would take the camera back into the Victorian just before the nightly screams began. Colin would stay behind, every light in their house blazing, a laptop open, fingers flying as he hunted for answers the town didn't want anyone to find. As the sun bled orange over the rooftops, Jeff stood at the window and stared at the house across the yard. The shadows behind the curtains seemed darker tonight, watching. Waiting. Mac slung his backpack over his shoulder, trying to sound casual. "Just for the record, this is absolutely the dumbest thing I've ever agreed to." Spade smirked, his voice sharp but thin. "You say that like we haven't done dumber." "Yeah," Mac shot back, but none of those dumb things involved being sucked into a soul-eating camera. Jeff didn't laugh, because every word felt like a countdown, because the moment they stepped back into that house, there was no going back. Colin's voice was the last thing they heard before they crossed the lawn. "Don't get caught," he said, his tone flat, almost pleading, then softer, barely audible. "And don't make me figure out how to bring you back from the dead." The house looked patient. That was the only word for it. It didn't loom, it didn't threaten, it waited, like it knew exactly what Jeff, Mac, and Spade were about to do, and it was ready. The moment Jeff pushed the door open, the smell hit them again. Damp wood, dust, and something sweet underneath, like rotting fruit left in the sun. Mac gagged. "Jesus, it smells like something died in here." Spade muttered, "Something probably did." The floorboards groaned under their feet as they stepped inside. The house seemed to settle, its creaks sounding like a sigh of relief, like it had been holding its breath for them. Jeff gripped the Polaroid tighter. The camera felt different now, heavier, humming faintly in his hands like it was awake. "Okay," Mac said, his voice tight, fake casual. "Let's just take the pictures, find out whatever we can, and get out before—" Click. Whir. The flash went off before he finished the sentence. It wasn't Jeff who pressed it. The camera went off by itself. The flash lit the room in an instant of blinding white, and then the world ripped open. It started as a sound, a low, deep tearing, like fabric splitting under strain. Then the walls of the house seemed to bend, the corners pulled away from each other, the ceiling stretching like taffy, the air itself shaking. Jeff's stomach lurched, the ground tilting under his feet as if gravity had been unhooked. The pictures on the dusty mantel curled, blackened, and disappeared. And then the floor wasn't there anymore. They fell. Not like a normal fall, no ground rushing up, no wind in their ears. They dropped through nothing, weightless, tumbling into blackness that felt like it had teeth. The scream that tore from Mac's throat sounded small, swallowed instantly. Jeff tried to yell, but the air was thick, choking, filling his mouth like syrup. And then they hit. The ground they landed on wasn't ground. It felt soft, like skin. Jeff pushed himself up, gasping. His palms sank into the surface, warm, pliant, slick. He jerked his hands away, heart hammering. Mac was swearing, scrambling to his knees. "Where the hell? What the hell? Spade was staring upward, his mouth slack. There was no ceiling. Above them was a sky that wasn't a sky, just blackness with something moving behind it. Something huge. The air was wrong, too still, too thick. Every breath felt like inhaling someone else's breath, and from far off, somewhere in that endless black, a hiss crawled across the dark, low, long, hungry. Jeff's stomach dropped as he realized something. They hadn't fallen out of the house, they'd fallen through it, and the camera had brought them here. The first thing Jeff noticed was the sound. A low, dragging hiss that seemed to slither along the ground and crawl up their spines. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was the kind of sound that made your body know it was prey. Mac's voice cracked, sharp and too loud in the suffocating stillness. "Tell me that's the wind." "There's no wind here," Spade muttered, his voice thin. Jeff turned in a slow circle, the Polaroid clutched to his chest. The place stretched in every direction, endless black terrain broken by jagged shapes. They weren't trees, they weren't rocks. They were things. Tall, bent spines that looked like they might have been people once, now petrified into crooked monuments. Some had fingers instead of branches, curled and reaching. The ground beneath their feet gave slightly with every step, warm and spongy like bruised flesh. The hiss came again, closer. Jeff raised the camera without thinking. Click, whir. The flash exploded in the dark, harsh and sudden. The picture slid out. Jeff's heart stuttered. The photo showed something standing just behind Mac. Something tall. Its body was all angles and joints that bent wrong. Its arms were long, the claws longer, white, hooked, and dripping black fluid. Its face was a blur except for its mouth. The mouth was open too wide. Smiling. "Mac, move!" Jeff yelled. Mac spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty dark. The hiss turned into a laugh, not a human laugh, a rasping, broken thing, like dry leaves scraping across bone. Shapes moved in the periphery, shadows pulling themselves up from the ground, unfolding with horrible slowness. Dozens of them, too many. Spade whispered, "What the hell are those?" No one answered, because the things were getting closer. Jeff snapped another photo. Click, whir. Another flash, another image. This one showed one of the creatures fully. A thin gray figure with limbs like wires, a spine that jutted out in spikes, and a head that tilted too far, as if its neck had no limits. And its eyes, if they could be called that, were empty pits, blacker than the void around them. Something slashed across Spade's leg, nothing visible, just pain and blood. He staggered, swearing. "They're right here," he shouted, swinging wildly at the air. The hiss became a chorus. Dozens of voices, some high, some low, all layered, all wrong, all hungry. And then the creatures came into focus, not in the world, but in the photos. Every picture Jeff snapped showed them closer. 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 Jeff's hands shook so badly the next photo almost slipped. The image developed, black claws wrapped around his own shoulders. The thing was already touching him. "Run!" he screamed. And for the first time, all three of them did exactly that. They ran until their lungs burned. Every step sank into that awful, soft ground, like they were sprinting across something alive. The air felt heavier the farther they went, every breath like pulling smoke into their throats. The hissing followed. No, it surrounded them now. Dozens of voices, some sharp and quick, like knives scraping glass, others low and guttural, like something buried deep under the earth. "Jeff!" Mac's voice cracked, panicked. "Where are we even going?" Jeff didn't answer, because there wasn't anywhere to go. The black world stretched on endlessly, broken by strange, crooked shapes that looked almost like door frames, empty door frames, standing alone in the dark. Some were cracked, some were bent, and then they saw her. Sarah. She was huddled under one of the door frames, knees to her chest, her hair matted and wild. Her face was pale, streaked with dirt and something else, scratches, deep, angry ones that bled slowly down her arms. Her eyes snapped up when she saw them, wide and desperate. "You shouldn't have come here," she rasped, voice hoarse from screaming. Jeff dropped to his knees beside her. "You're alive," he said, breathless. Sarah's eyes darted to the Polaroid hanging around his neck like an anchor. "That's what brought you here," she said, voice trembling. "It's not a camera, it's a key, a trap, A hiss cut her off, louder now, closer. Shapes were moving in the dark, spines cracking, limbs unfolding. The creatures were coming. Spade's voice broke into a shout. Jeff, we don't have time for explanations. Jeff grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her up. She staggered but didn't fight him. The ground beneath their feet shuddered. The creatures poured from the dark, thin gray bodies, clawed hands dragging across the soft ground, their heads snapping from side to side like broken dolls. Their mouths were open too wide, too many teeth, too much hunger. Jeff lifted the camera. Click, whir. The flash lit the world for a heartbeat, showing them just how many there were. Dozens, hundreds, all smiling. Mac grabbed Jeff's arm, his voice sharp with fear. No more pictures, man. Every time you take one, they get closer. Jeff's hands shook, but he didn't lower the camera. Because one of the creatures lunged, claws out, Sarah screamed. The flash went off again. The photo slid out, a blur of claws just inches from Sarah's throat. She touched her neck, gasping. No wound this time, but Jeff's shoulder burned. A deep, fresh slash, like the creature's strike, had hit him instead. Spade swung a broken plank of wood he'd found in the void. He didn't know if it would do anything, but he swung hard enough to crack the thing's arm. The creature shrieked, the sound stabbing into their ears, and pulled back. Jeff grabbed Sarah's hand. "Run," he said, his voice raw. And they ran again. The hissing turned to laughter. The creatures followed. The black world twisted around them, door frames appearing and vanishing, the ground sloping and pulsing underfoot. But they didn't stop. They couldn't, because they knew if they slowed even for a second, those long gray claws would tear them apart. Colin hadn't left the kitchen table all night. Stacks of dusty printouts and glowing tabs on his laptop surrounded him like a fortress. His fingers shook as he scrolled, digging through every forgotten scrap of history Baleful Creek had tried to bury. Old fraternity records, police reports that had vanished from official archives, grainy photos of smiling boys who never came home. Every thread tied back to the same place, the house, and every thread tied back to the camera. In the dark world, Jeff, Mac, Spade, and Sarah were running out of breath and time. The black ground shuddered under their feet, the texture softening, sucking at their shoes like mud. Behind them, the hissing had become something else. Laughter, a chorus of it, high and low, layered and broken, like 1,000 throats choking on their own amusement. Sarah stumbled, nearly going down. Jeff yanked her back up, his voice ragged. "Keep moving." Her hair stuck to her face in sweaty strands, her breaths sharp and shallow. "There's no out from here," she gasped. "Not unless..." She glanced at the Polaroid swinging from Jeff's neck. "Not unless the camera lets you out." The creatures weren't even hiding now. They crawled from the darkness, thin gray figures with spines like jagged glass and claws long enough to carve the air. Their mouths split open into two wide smiles as they circled, clicking, hissing, hungry, waiting. Jeff snapped another picture. Click, whir. The flash exploded, and the nearest creature screamed, stumbling back, its black eyes glowing for a fraction of a second. The picture slid out, showing the thing's claws inches from Jeff's chest. He looked down, another fresh wound, thin lines, already bleeding. The camera was stealing pieces of him with every flash. In the real world, Colin's hands flew over the keys, muttering to himself. "There has to be a way. There has to be a way." And then he found it. An archived forum, half broken, with a story from someone who'd lived in the house 30 years ago. A boy who claimed the camera took his brother. A boy who claimed he brought him back. The instructions were barely legible, words smudged, half-eaten by time. But one line was clear. Take their picture, tear the film, open the way. Colin's chair screeched against the floor as he bolted up, grabbing his phone. "Jeff, tear the picture," he shouted into the void as if Jeff could hear him. In the dark world, Jeff's head snapped up. The Polaroid felt like it weighed 50 pounds now, the strap cutting into his neck. The creatures were closing in, their gray bodies forming a wall of claws and teeth. One lunged. Max swung his plank of wood, smashing it in the face. The creature shrieked, jerking back, but 3 more filled its place. "Jeff, do something," Spade screamed. Jeff raised the camera. Click, whir. The flash blinded them. Another picture slid out. This one showed the 4 of them, surrounded. The creatures were on all sides, their long claws inches from their throats. The image felt alive in his hand, like it was breathing. Jeff didn't think. He grabbed the photo by both sides and tore it in half. The world split with it. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, a blinding white light tearing through the blackness like a wound. The creatures screamed, horrible, ear-splitting shrieks that made the air itself vibrate. They lunged, claws slicing, teeth gnashing, but the light pulled harder. Like gravity turned inside out. Jeff grabbed Sarah, Mac, and Spade, the 4 of them clinging together as the ground fell away. The creatures clawed at them. Mac's shirt tore. Spade screamed as black claws raked his back. And then the light swallowed them. They crashed to the wooden floor of the Victorians' living room, gasping, coughing, covered in blood and dirt that didn't belong to this world. The camera lay on its side, smoke curling from its edges. Colin was there in seconds, eyes wide, frantic. "You're back," he breathed like he couldn't believe it. But Jeff wasn't listening, because as he looked down, the torn photograph was still in his hands, and the 2 halves of the image didn't match anymore. The creatures in the photo were gone, but the space they'd left behind was still moving. The living room was too bright. The lamps burned like interrogation lights, every corner of the Victorian house sharp and exposed, but that didn't make it safer. The air was wrong, heavy, thick, like the dark world had followed them through the crack they'd torn open. Jeff lay sprawled on the floor, chest heaving, the torn Polaroid clutched in his trembling hands. His knuckles were raw, his fingernails packed with black dirt from that place. Max sat against the wall, gasping, his shirt shredded and dark with blood where claws had raked him. Spade was hunched forward, silent for once, staring at his own hands like he wasn't sure they were still attached to him. Sarah was on her knees, pale, hair matted, staring blankly at the floor. Colin knelt beside them, his voice cracking. "You made it, you..." He stopped because he saw Jeff's eyes, and the look in them wasn't relief. The Polaroid lay on the floor between them, the camera body blackened and warped, smoke curling from the lens. Jeff dropped the torn photo next to it. The image was ruined, just streaks of shadow, no faces, no claws. But as Colin bent down to look closer, his breath caught. Because the photo wasn't still. A faint movement rippled across the glossy surface, like something pressing from the other side. The black streaks shifted, almost forming shapes. Hands. Spade saw it too and scrambled back, his voice breaking. "Oh, hell no. Nope. No, I am not." The floor creaked, loud, deep, like a warning. Sarah's head snapped toward the sound, her voice hoarse. "It's not over." Jeff looked at her, his heart sinking. "What do you mean?" She didn't blink. "The house isn't finished with you." Mac gave a hollow laugh, leaning his head back against the wall. Great, love that for us. But his laugh died quick when the torn photo shifted again. And the shadow of a smile rippled across it. The house groaned, its walls trembling like something enormous was waking up inside them, and somewhere upstairs a light flicked on. Soft, warm, inviting. Jeff's head turned slowly toward the staircase, because for the first time since they'd come back, they realized the house wasn't empty. Not anymore. Outside, the for sale sign creaked in the wind. Inside, the Polaroid's lens gave one last faint whir. And the shadow in the torn photograph reached closer to the glass. They survived. But the camera still worked. The house still waited. And in the darkness behind the photograph, something smiled.